They called her a criminal, but she was just a girl, with a soul as soft as prayer, crossing the border with torn souls, and a heart made of paper. She didn't come for riches. She didn't come for glory. She came because hunger don't ask for passports, because violence don't care about your dreams, because silence is louder when your babies are crying. Her name was Isadora, but nobody asked. They just called her illegal, as if her existence was a stain, as if surviving was a sin. She walked for 13 days, pregnant, alone, feet blistered, bleeding through dollar store sandals, one hand on her belly, the other holding the name of a church, written in smudged ink, on a napkin soaked in sweat, somewhere in El Paso, where the desert doesn't forgive and the sun hangs heavy like judgment. She found it. A small white church, old wood peeling, a single cross leaning like it too, was tired of standing. Isadora didn't speak. She just stepped in, placed the bundle down, a newborn wrapped in a worn-out t-shirt, still warm from her chest, still breathing the scent of hope. She didn't cry. Not then, because the crying had already carved itself into her lungs. She prayed without words, pressed her forehead to the church floor, and walked back into the silence. They said she abandoned him. The judge used that word like a hammer. Abandonment. But God had other plans. If you've ever felt forgotten or punished just for trying to survive, stay here with me. This story wasn't born to be beautiful. It was born to be told. It was a Tuesday, hot, like judgment, the kind of heat that presses your sins back into your skin. And in the shadows of a strip mall dumpster, they found her. She didn't run, just stood there, hands swollen, feet cracked open like old promises. Her eyes were far away, somewhere between the memory of a baby's cry and the ghost of a lullaby her mother used to sing. The agent spoke Spanish, but not the kind that comes from the soul. His words were cold, practiced, like he'd said them too many times to too many women. "You know what this is, right?" he asked, holding up her wrists, like the handcuffs were some kind of mirror. Isadora said nothing. Because what could she say? That she gave birth in silence, that the shirt she wrapped her son in was her brother's old uniform, that the cross on that church door was the only place she ever felt seen. The van smelled like rubber and despair. She sat in the back, hands chained, eyes closed, whispering a prayer not to be saved, but to be remembered. They booked her as female, unknown, no ID. Another number, another case, another brown woman with no country to claim her. But what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that the church kept the shirt, and inside its pocket was something that didn't belong to her, something that didn't belong to anyone, yet would change everything. There was a folded piece of paper, not larger than a thumb, yellowed, damp from sweat and time, tucked deep inside the pocket of the baby's shirt. The same shirt Isadora had wrapped him in, the shirt that still smelled like her chest and like something older than fear. Sister Ruth was the one who found it. She was the one who picked up the baby from the steps of the church, wrapped him in a blanket from the altar, and rocked him under the wooden cross. It was sometime between morning prayer and afternoon heat that she felt something stiff inside the fabric. She unfolded it slowly, expecting perhaps a hospital band, a name, a number. But it wasn't that. It was a note, scrawled in a trembling hand, in Spanish but with the weight of 1,000 broken English prayers. If he ever asks, tell him I wanted to stay, tell him I sang to him every night, tell him his name is David, and that it means beloved. No signature, no date, just that, and a smear where a tear had once dried. Sister Ruth felt her breath catch, not because of the words, but because of the silence behind them. She knew the system. She'd worked in shelters, hospitals and courtrooms. She'd seen children tagged, numbered, placed like boxes, but this was something else. This wasn't abandonment. This was sacrifice. But the courts don't know the difference. They don't care what a mother whispers when she kisses a forehead for the last time. They only care what the paper says. And this note, it wasn't enough. Because when Isadora stood before the judge, handcuffed and hollow-eyed, they never mentioned the note. They never said his name, David. They only called him infant male, and the woman who tried to read the truth behind Isadora's silence, the young public defender, just months out of law school, she was cut off. Irrelevant, counselor, the judge snapped. She left the child. Case is closed. But it wasn't closed, not really, because Sister Ruth made a copy of that note and hid it underneath the hymnal pages of Psalm 27, the one that says, "Though my mother and father forsake me, the Lord will receive me." And she began to pray, not for the baby, not for herself, but for the mother who couldn't speak, because something in her gut told her this story wasn't over. He came every Thursday, didn't speak, didn't sing, just sat in the back pew, near the cracked stained glass that let the afternoon light bleed in like a wound. People called him Viejo, though he couldn't have been more than 50. Skin dark, hands thick with calluses, a long scar across his jaw that made his mouth look always half shut. No one knew where he came from. Some said prison, others said war, but Sister Ruth, she just called him Samuel. And that Thursday, the one after the baby arrived, the one after the note was hidden, he didn't sit. He walked straight to the altar, where the baby lay in a borrowed crib, and stood there for a long time, his hands behind his back, his eyes full of something ancient. Then he knelt, and when he whispered, his voice was rough, like gravel rubbed with honey. "This boy got fire in him," he said. "You can feel it, even asleep." Then he reached into his coat, pulled out a tiny wooden cross, and placed it gently under the child's fingers. "This belonged to a woman I loved once," he said. "She died in a place that don't even exist on the map no more. But she had that same look, like she'd been to hell and brought back a piece of heaven with her." Sister Ruth didn't ask questions, not then, but later, when she opened the crib and saw the cross and saw the initials carved into the wood, "I.M." Her heart stopped, because those weren't his initials. They were hers, Isadora Morales, which meant Samuel had known her. Before all this, before the border, before the baby, before the sirens and the courtroom and the prison cell. And if he had her cross, he might also have something else, something that could shatter the whole case. But he was gone, vanished like morning fog, leaving behind nothing but that little cross clutched in David's hand. And the question Sister Ruth couldn't silence. Who was this man, really? And what did he know? The library was almost empty. A single fan spun overhead, slow and tired. Dust floated like old prayers in the afternoon sun. And Sister Ruth, still in her blue skirt, hands trembling slightly, sat in front of the ancient microfilm machine, chasing ghosts through fragments of a forgotten life. She didn't know what she was looking for, only that the cross, the initials, the man, none of it sat right in her spirit. And so she searched El Paso, Juarez, even the old mission records, scrolling through births, obituaries, missing person reports, anything with Morales, anything with Samuel. But it wasn't until she opened the 2008 parish bulletin from across the border that she saw her, Isadora, younger, smiling, hair pulled back in a blue ribbon, holding a guitar like it was part of her body. And next to her, there he was, no scar, just Samuel, whole-faced and young, with one arm around her shoulder and the other lifting a white wooden cross to the sky. They'd been part of a youth ministry, evangelizing in the northern villages, teaching songs to children who slept on floors, bringing bread where the government brought nothing. But then something happened. The records stopped, the photos vanished. No wedding, no departure notice, just silence. And a line scribbled by hand under the last entry of the church register, "Fire at Camposanto, all records lost." But Sister Ruth knew better. That kind of fire don't just happen, not in places where the walls still remember screams. Something had torn them apart. Something had burned their names out of the book and left Isadora with nothing but a child and a cross she no longer wore. And maybe, just maybe, Samuel had carried more than guilt. Maybe he'd carried proof. But proof of what? Of love, of betrayal, of violence hidden in the folds of holy robes. Sister Ruth stood, grabbed the printout, folded it gently, and tucked it into the pocket of her skirt. Because if Isadora was being judged as an illegal, as an abandoner, then the world deserved to know what she had survived. And someone still breathing, had to carry her story through the fire. They had tried to break her in silence. 2 weeks. No visitors, no translator, no name on the chart. Just Jane Doe, immigration hold, like she was a lost suitcase left behind at the border of someone else's war. The cell was cold, colder than the desert had ever been. She wore state-issued grey, ate from a tray without looking, prayed with her eyes open because she knew even dreams could be used against her. But she wasn't broken. Isadora had built a cathedral inside herself, each memory a stone, each prayer a window, each night survived, another candle lit. And on the 15th day, they brought her into the courtroom again. Same judge, same prosecutor, same public defender with her tired eyes and wrinkled suit. The room was small, but the weight of it pressed down like a storm cloud. The guard told her to sit. She didn't move. He touched her shoulder. She flinched, but not from fear, from memory, because that's how the fire had started. A hand too rough, a word too loud, a refusal wrapped in scripture and smoke, and something inside her opened. Isadora stepped forward. No microphone, no translator, just her voice, low, clear, like a river breaking through stone. My name is Isadora Morales. My son's name is David. He is not abandoned, he is loved. The courtroom went still. Even the judge paused, a pen hovering above her notes. I did not leave him because I didn't want him. I left him because I wanted him to live, because in my country I was hunted, and in yours I was invisible. The translator blinked, tears welling up before she even began to echo the words in English. The judge shifted, eyes narrow, trying to decide if this was defiance or something else. But then Isadora reached into her waistband and pulled out a torn page from a Bible, Psalm 34. She had carried it in her underwear for 3 weeks. The Lord is close to the broken-hearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. She placed it on the table, folded her hands, and waited, not for mercy, but for justice, the kind that only truth can summon. She leaned forward, took off her glasses, and with the air of someone folding a napkin after dinner, Judge R. Hargrove looked Isadora dead in the eye and said, "You people always find a way to run from your responsibilities." No one moved. Not the lawyer, not the court reporter, not even the guard, who had just started to chew his gum a little slower. Isadora didn't blink, didn't flinch, but something in her chest went quiet, like a bird stopping its song, because it senses a predator near. "You have a child," the judge continued, "a child you abandoned. Now you want the court to believe you're a victim." The translator hesitated, looked at Isadora, then at the judge. Her mouth opened, then closed again. The words never made it across the line, but Isadora understood. You don't need translation to feel when a dagger is thrown at your soul. Judge Hargrove straightened her papers, eyes blank as polished marble. Sentence will be announced next week. Until then, she remains in federal custody. Next case. The gavel fell. And with it, so did the mask, because that wasn't law. That was disgust, old and practiced, the kind that wears lipstick and pearls but still smells like burning crosses and locked doors. They led Isadora out of the courtroom, not back to the van, but to a smaller room, colder, with a single chair, a cracked mirror, and a woman with a clipboard. "Do you understand English now?" the woman asked. Isadora didn't answer, not because she didn't understand, but because she finally did. This wasn't about paperwork, or visas, or codes. This was about making an example. They wanted her silence to mean guilt. They wanted her dignity to look like defiance. They wanted her love to look like a crime. But they had made one mistake. They had let her speak. And somewhere behind a locked drawer in the courthouse basement, a social worker was staring at a sealed file with a recording she wasn't supposed to have, a recording that captured every word the judge had said, including the ones that were never meant to leave the room. Her name was Elise, graduate of Brown, daughter of missionaries, social worker for the state of Texas for 7 years, wore flats, drank chamomile tea, and believed, at least once, that the system could be healed from the inside. But that was before she met Isadora, before the judge's words stained the air, before Elise sat in the back of the courtroom and listened to a woman speak truth in a voice no one wanted to hear. She hadn't planned to record it, but when the judge started speaking, something in Elise's stomach twisted, a memory maybe, or the echo of her grandmother's voice, whispering warnings about women like that who wear authority like a veil but spit venom when no one's watching. She had hit record on instinct, not to expose, just to remember. Now, she couldn't forget. The file sat on her computer, titled nothing more than Session A, 9:12 a.m. But inside, a voice clear as sunlight through broken glass. You people always find a way to run from your responsibilities. Elise couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. She stared at that file like it might vanish if she blinked too hard. The next morning, she opened the drawer in her desk, took out a yellow envelope, slid in a copy of the audio, along with the transcript she'd typed up herself. She hesitated, hand hovering over the recipient line. Should she send it to her supervisor, risk her job, risk everything? Or should she burn it and bury the guilt like the others had? But then she remembered Isadora's voice. Low, steady, sacred. He is not abandoned. He is loved. And Elisa felt something split open. Not shame, not fear. Conviction. She sealed the envelope, wrote a name on the front. Public Defender Marissa Clark. And under that, urgent. Then she walked to the post office. And as she dropped the envelope through the slot, she whispered a prayer. Not for safety, not for protection, but for truth. Because if that truth reached the right hands, it might just turn the tide. He stood near the soda machine, hat low, phone in hand, but not scrolling, not texting, just pretending. His real eyes were watching Elise, tracking her every move as she stepped out of the post office, as she crossed the sun-bleached pavement with her cardigan clinging to the sweat on her back. He wasn't dressed like a cop, not quite, too clean for a drifter, too quiet for a friend. And when Elise turned, just for a moment, she saw him. Their eyes met, and in that single second, she felt it. Surveillance. She walked faster, into her car, hands shaking on the wheel, trying not to look into the mirror too long, trying not to let the panic crawl up her throat. Back at her apartment, she locked the door, drew the curtains, checked every room twice. The envelope was already gone. She had no copies, but her heart, it beat like a hammer against the walls of her ribs, because that man hadn't just been watching her. He'd been assigned, and she remembered what her supervisor once told her in whispers, after a case that vanished without reason. Don't get too close, don't poke around. There are hands in this system that don't like questions. And yet, the next morning, Elise went to work anyway, because some truths are heavier than fear. Some names, like Isadora's, carried too much silence around them. So Elise started digging. Phone calls, old case files, visits to the juvenile division, the immigration office, the church. She asked questions no one wanted to answer. And that's when the messages started. Anonymous, one-line emails, no subject, no signature, not your fight. Let it go. We know what you mailed. But it was the last one that froze her blood. Ask your father what happened in Campo Santo. Campo Santo. The place that burned. The place Isadora vanished from. The place Samuel never spoke of. Elise dropped her phone, because suddenly this wasn't just about a baby or a judge. It was about something older, something buried, and maybe, just maybe, her family was part of it. He answered the door in his robe, grey hair, hands stained with ink, smelling faintly of coffee and the past. Elise, he said, surprised. It's late. She didn't respond, just stepped inside, closed the door behind her, and placed a single word on the kitchen table like a loaded gun. Campo Santo. His face changed. Not fear, not anger, recognition. He sat, took off his glasses, ran a hand over his mouth, like he was wiping away the lies he'd been telling himself for years. "Elise," he began, but she didn't let him finish. "You were there, weren't you? You knew about the fire. You knew what happened to her." He looked down. "Yes." It came out like a cough, dry, full of dust. "She came to us for help. Isadora. She and the boy, Samuel." Her breath caught. "Samuel?" He nodded. "They were volunteers. We were running a mission, feeding families, preaching in the hills. They were young, brave, too brave maybe." His voice faltered. "She told us someone was following her. A man from the town, a deacon, someone who'd hurt other girls." Elise swallowed hard. "And what did you do?" His eyes met hers. "We told her to stay quiet." Silence, the kind that rots the walls of churches. "She was going to report him anyway," he said, "and that night the fire started. Everything burned, records, names. She disappeared. Samuel was found 3 days later, alone, half mad. He wouldn't talk, just kept saying her name, over and over." "And the deacon," Elise whispered. He looked away. "Promoted." That word, it cracked something inside her. "You helped cover it up," she said. "You buried her name." "I was young," he said. "It was complicated." "No," Elise replied. "It was convenient." She stood, grabbed her coat. "You sent that email, didn't you?" she asked. "Ask your father what happened. You knew this day would come." He didn't deny it, just looked at her with eyes no longer innocent. "Elise," he said softly, "if you push this, they'll come after you too." She didn't look back, because truth, real truth, doesn't ask for permission. It just walks straight into the fire and waits to see who will follow. But while Elise faced her past, someone else was coming for Isadora's son. Can I tell you who tried to take David from the church? It was just after midnight. The wind had gone still. The cicadas had quieted. Even the moon looked afraid. And in the distance, under the trembling light of a street lamp, he waited. Tall, thin, wearing a suit too clean for someone without a name. Sister Ruth spotted him from the window above the altar. He didn't knock, didn't call, just stood there, looking at the chapel doors like they owed him something. She went to the crib. David was asleep, mouth open, hands curled around the wooden cross. His breath came soft, like a whispered hymn, unaware that the past was walking toward him. Ruth stepped outside. The man didn't smile. "I'm here for the child," he said, voice smooth, practiced. She squinted through the dark. "From where?" "Office of Refugee Resettlement." He flashed a badge. Too fast. Ruth had seen enough to know. "You're not ORR," she said. "You're not even from this state." Silence. Then the man stepped closer. And for a moment, just a flicker, Ruth saw it in his eyes. The same look the judge had. That cold disgust. That bureaucratic rage that comes when a poor brown woman dares to resist. "This child is undocumented," he said. "No known relatives, no paperwork, no legal basis to remain." Ruth didn't move. "He has a name," she said. "David Morales. And he was left in the house of God. Which means he's not abandoned. He's been entrusted." The man's face hardened. "You can be arrested for interference. Then arrest me." And with that she turned, locked the chapel doors, bolted the windows, lit 3 candles before the altar, and sat down on the floor beside the crib. Her hands shook. Her voice did not. She began to sing, softly, a lullaby her grandmother used to sing in the cane fields of Haiti. "Dormi piti, bon diela, li gade w, li kenbe w." Sleep, child. God is here. He sees you. He holds you. Outside, the man stood for another hour, then disappeared into the dark. But Ruth knew he'd be back. It was the next morning, the sun barely risen, the air heavy with humidity and dread, and from the far end of the street, they came. 2 black SUVs, government plates, 5 agents in Kevlar vests, 1 woman in a navy suit, clipboard in hand, eyes like glass. Sister Ruth didn't run. She stood at the church steps, Bible in one hand, David in the other. The woman stepped forward. "Are you Sister Ruth Ellison?" "I am." We're here with a federal removal order. Section 123, unauthorized custody of a minor alien. She said it like reading a grocery list. Like David was an object, a misplaced file, a mistake they came to collect. Ruth didn't move. The child has no known family, the woman continued. He is a ward of the state until deportation or placement. He has a mother, Ruth said, and she's still alive. Convicted. Not yet. The agents shifted behind the woman. One of them placed a hand on his belt. Ruth stepped back, cradled David tighter. He's not going anywhere, she said. You're obstructing federal officers. No, I'm protecting a child of God. Silence. Then one of the agents moved forward, and in that moment, just before his boot hit the first step, another voice rang out. Low, rough, familiar. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Samuel. He stood at the edge of the lot, hands in his coat. Face bruised from some war, he didn't explain, but his eyes, they were burning. I know who sent you, he said to the woman. I know who signed that order, and I know what they're hiding. The woman narrowed her eyes. You're interfering with a federal case. No, Samuel said. I'm reopening one. He pulled something from his coat. A folder. Old, frayed at the edges. Inside, photographs, letters, copies of reports, long thought destroyed. Proof of Camposanto. Proof of what was done to Isadora. Proof of names protected and lives erased. He tossed it onto the hood of the SUV. You take that back to your boss, he said, and tell them this time the fire didn't burn everything. The agents hesitated. The woman read, paused, then snapped the folder shut. We'll be in contact. And just like that, they left, dust in their wake. But the threat still hung in the air. Ruth exhaled. David stirred in her arms. Samuel sat on the church steps, and for the first time in days, they all cried. Not because they were afraid, but because the truth, after all this time, had finally begun to speak. But while they held each other, in a prison 3 hours away, the judge had just received a package. Can I tell you what she found inside? Judge Hargrove arrived late that day. Hair pinned high, pearl earrings, the smell of perfume layered over something sour. Her clerk handed her the mail as she climbed the courthouse stairs. Just this one, Judge. No return address. Stamped urgent judicial review. She frowned, ripped the seal open with the tip of her nail, pulled out a single USB stick and a note typed in clean, square font. Listen before you decide. This time, the world is watching. She almost laughed, but something in her gut, old and buried, tightened. She closed the door to her chambers, sat, plugged the drive into her private laptop. There was one file, titled Session A, 9:12 a.m. And as the audio played, she heard her own voice, sharp, dismissing, cruel. You people always find a way to run from your responsibilities. The room grew colder, or maybe it was her blood. She paused the file, tried to breathe, but there it was, undeniable, unedited, spoken in her own tongue, in front of witnesses, and now echoing far beyond the courtroom walls. She stood, went to the window. Outside, the sky was darkening, storm clouds rolling in like a verdict. She remembered her father, a judge himself, telling her once, "Never let your words outlive your integrity." She'd forgotten that. Somewhere between promotions, campaign donors, and the quiet winks of men in polished shoes, she had let the robe become armor. But this was different. This time the mirror wasn't kind. There was a knock. "Judge, you're needed in court. It's the Morales case." Her fingers shook. Because deep down she knew if she continued with the sentence she had prepared, she would not only bury a woman, but the last of her own soul, and that she might not recover from. But when she entered the courtroom, someone was waiting for her at the bench, someone she never expected to see again. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that comes before the wind shifts. Isadora sat in her grey prison uniform, eyes forward, spine straight, like a mountain that refused to erode. Next to her, Marissa Clark, her public defender, clutched a stack of papers, and across the room, Elise stood, face pale, voice steady. She had come, not just with the audio, but with the documents, the burned files from Camposanto, the testimonies, the photo of Isadora holding that guitar in the churchyard, long before her name became a case number. And then, Samuel. He entered through the side door, hands tucked in his coat, carrying the weight of 2 decades in his shoulders. When Judge Hargrove saw him, her lips parted, then closed again, because she remembered. She remembered him from the mission, from the file she'd helped seal, from the silence she'd been paid to enforce. And for the first time in her career, she hesitated. Marissa stood. "Your Honor, we request dismissal of all charges. We submit that Ms. Morales was not fleeing responsibility, but persecution. We submit that the evidence suppressed in 2008 proves a pattern of abuse and state neglect. We submit that the judge presiding over this case has demonstrated bias that compromises judicial integrity." Gasps echoed. Judge Hargrove did not interrupt, because she couldn't. Not anymore. She looked at Isadora, really looked, and saw not a criminal, but a survivor, a mother, a flame that refused to be extinguished. She turned to the clerk. "Enter the motion into record." She stood, removed her robe, laid it across the bench. "I recuse myself." Gasps again. "I also apologize," she said. And it was not loud, it was not elegant, but it was real. She left the bench, and just like that, for the first time, Isadora was seen. Not as a number, not as a threat, but as a woman who had carried her dignity through fire and chains. Samuel reached for her hand. David was safe, the system was exposed, and the silence had finally broken. But there was one last thing Isadora needed to do. One last door she had to open before she could ever be free. Can I tell you what she did next? The church was quiet. No sirens, no agents, no threats, just wind slipping through stained glass and the soft creak of wooden pews that had held too many broken prayers. Isadora stood at the altar, not in chains, not in shame, in white. A simple dress, borrowed from Sister Ruth, hair pulled back with a blue ribbon, the same she wore in that photo, before the fire, before the name Morales was written in fear. David was in her arms, bigger now, sleepy-eyed, clutching the wooden cross like it was a map to something better. The congregation was small, just a few hearts who had refused to look away. Samuel, Elise, Marissa, even the judge, at the very back, head bowed, hands shaking with something that looked like repentance. Isadora spoke softly, with that voice that once shook a courtroom. "I didn't come to this country for a dream. I came because I had no choice. Because in the silence, you learn to hear God louder." She looked down at David. He blinked, smiled. "I gave him up once," she said, "but not because I stopped loving him. I gave him up because the world tried to take everything else, and I refused to let them take him too." She looked out at the faces, each one holding a piece of the truth. "They called me illegal, called me mother, called me liar, but I am none of those things." She paused. "I am survivor. I am believer. I am woman. And I am not done." And then she stepped outside, into a sky full of clouds. But in her eyes it was made of paper, not because it was weak, but because it could carry stories, and hers was ready to fly. They tried to lock her behind bars, but truth has no cell. They tried to erase her with silence, but silence only made her louder. They tried to label her an abandoner, but they forgot. Abandonment is walking away from love, and love was the only thing she never let go. She left her baby at a church. The judge called it a crime, but heaven called it hope. Because some stories don't end in shame. They end in resurrection. They end in a woman standing in the wreckage, still whole. And maybe, just maybe, that's what justice looks like. Pastor Elijah, voz firm e intima ao final. If this story touched something deep inside you, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because some truths don't shout. They whisper, they knock, they wait, until one day the whole world listens.